Lovely, thank you, Gareth. Well, welcome everyone to the Education and Skills Policy Development Committee on the 17th of November, on a quite a fresh sort of evening. And thanks very much for your attendance. Can I start off with apologies for absence, please?
From Councillor Jan Curtis, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We got any others? No. Okay. Can I ask for disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests, please? I think it's worth mentioning. I know we've got a legal officer in the room, but it's worth mentioning that I'm a member of the governing body at Dylan Thomas School, and on a personal level, there's links going back sometime between Matthew Goulding's family and myself. Just worth mentioning. Just to be
that's fine, no, it's noted. Yeah, it's fine. You don't make a decision, so that's fine, but worth mentioning, no problem.
Lovely, thank you, Stephanie. So can we go on to the minutes of the last meeting, held and chaired expertly by the vice chairperson? Thank you, Sam, for standing in for me. I was predisposed with a funeral on that day. Can I ask us to go through the minutes, page 1, page 2, and page 3? And if we are content, can I ask for somebody to, can these be approved and signed as a correct record of the meeting? Are we content, members who were there? Thank you, Lyndon.
I propose that they're a true record.
Lovely, thank you, Bev. Okay, so we move on to agenda item number 4, keeping pupils on track, examples of best practice from Pentrahafon and Dylan Thomas schools. And can I thank both schools for giving up their time to come along to help us with our work this evening. I'm not sure whether we planned who's going to go first, but if there's no objections, can I ask Mr. Payne from Dylan Thomas School if he would care to go first? Is that okay, Ashley?
Yeah, I'm just unmuting, sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I mean, Natalie Gedrick sent me a sort of rough outline of what you wanted us to talk about, but if you can just give me, because I've written quite a lot, but I don't want to take up the whole meeting with it all. But if you were looking at something in particular, then I might have it already written down.
Well, the focus of the committee, Ashley, is on education recovery at what is an unprecedented time, of course, as we all know. Okay. And we spent a significant amount of time supported initially by Professor Chris Chapman of Glasgow University to look at areas of best practice, and the committee decided that we wanted to look at data trends, and we've done a lot of work on looking at current data relating to Swansea schools, and I think it's fair to say that the committee was content not to make any assumptions, okay, you know, to be led by the facts as they stand. And we've looked at a lot of information relating to vulnerable learners, exclusion data, statistics, and you might know our colleague in education statistics, the brilliant Mike Jones, who led with that. So what we're looking at, and I'm conscious here, and I'm looking at Lyndon Jones now. Lyndon is the education scrutiny chair, and you will remember that great meeting we had at Dylan Thomas, Ashley, where we were welcomed so brilliantly by the school, but most importantly by the pupils. And we wanted to seek an example of best practice from Dylan Thomas School in the context of what works, really. How do we ensure that we keep young people on track? And for you to flesh out some of the key strands for Dylan Thomas School based on your experience of making sure that we keep young people on the right road and they don't fall by the educational wayside, really.
All right, okay. I mean, from my point of view, it's quite tiered. Like, it's not a hierarchical tier, but I mean, the SCASH head teachers, they continue to meet all the way through the pandemic on Teams, and I think that helped in terms of keeping leadership abreast of the local authorities' rigour involving the health and safety during the COVID pandemic. We kept in touch throughout that with our primary head clusters, so there was constant contact and support, opening up a health hub in Town Hill Primary School, which was largely manned by staff from Dylan Thomas. During the second pandemic, we continued with the vulnerable learners, children in our SDFs. We have two types of SDFs in our school. One was for children with moderate learning difficulties, and the other is an autistic unit. We opened those up, kept those running, invited them into the parents as well. They were very grateful that their children would keep that consistency. It avoided any other troubles or any what they would call a meltdown at home. It also gave our staff a lot of hope during that time, because they knew that they were getting back into sort of, although it wasn't normal, but they were getting into work practices and they were able to come in. During that time, we also we took all our registers, all our attendance registers, and looked through all the form groups, and then we started doing our own vulnerability and at-risk register. I think we had something like 137 in the first poll on it. I think we ended up with 235 kids that we were making contact with 3 times a week, either by door knocking and then standing at the end of the path, or via Teams, or even through the phone. That seemed to, it was a big support, not just for the staff, because they obviously have an emotional tie to many of those students, but also to those students knew that there were people out there looking after and looking out for them. And then just general good practice throughout. Then in the second lockdown, we opened up our own health hub within the school. We had the SDFs were coming in, but also we had other vulnerable learning groups from either child protection, child in need. We continued with the we had child protection cases during the pandemics. Nothing, compared to the local authority and social services. We were still maintaining those crucial meetings to support those families, of which maybe they weren't so affected by the pandemic, but the situations that they found themselves in, pandemic or not, were still worthy of ending up with children on the child protection register. So we continued our work with social services and the IROs as well. That was a good link. So we kept an up-to-date register of those who needed to come into school. We offered placement for those on a full-time basis inside the school. I think it's well documented throughout all of that. I mean, obviously at that time we had 55% of our school on free school meals. So it meant that over half of our school were coming in the first pandemic to collect food packages. We had to organise all those. Our clerical staff were kept incredibly busy on the second lockdown, because they'd gone from food packages to the payments. But those payments are only good if people have email addresses. So our clerical staff were busy organising Gmail addresses for parents who hadn't, and talking them through how to access their Gmails, and all the IT technicians, our IT guys here were brilliant. But also the community rallied around on that, of delivering laptops. Many of those laptops went out to students who we were struggling to reach out to, and those who were falling behind on their work. We were really conscious that through all of that, there was huge gaps in learning, and we were really conscious that we wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity, and that technology poverty wasn't going to bear effect. So we made sure we went out, myself in the head actually, we went out and hand delivered laptops in the I think it was the ice on the second one, but skidding and sliding in the minibus through the tight streets of Town Hill and May Hill. So many curtains were twitched seeing me and him rocking up in the cul-de-sacs handing out laptops. So it was good for us. It was good for the community to see us out there and to see the school bus moving around, just to make sure they all knew where we were. But I think the really important work as well came in after the pandemic, and trying to get kids back on track, trying to get them to engage back in school, working with the EWS service, making sure that it was making sure that the right tone was being taken when people were being, and the door knocking, but when our EWO was going out, to make sure that it was, compassion and empathy was delivered, as well as the sort of, trying to get your children back into school. But also working with some of those vulnerable groups, people. I mean, we had a phenomenal amount of parents who had medical conditions which would have been exasperated, or would have ultimately probably killed them if they got COVID. So we were having to work sort of emphatically around those, making sure that work was delivered, making sure work was available to them, but really encouraging kids to go back in. And I think one of the main things of that was the driving factor was the head teacher's social media usage, really, in advertising the school, advertising quite a lot of new projects and new undertakings that had happened during the lockdown periods, just to inviting people back in, getting them, encouraging to come back in. We were very much about, let's just get some bums on seats, you know, we'll sort the uniform out after a bit of time. You know, people haven't been able to go and get shop, you know, hadn't been able to buy trousers, you know, small things, you know, kids were being put off because they thought they would get into trouble for not having the right uniform and things like that. We were like, let's just get the kids in, let's just get them established, get back into routines. But then what we put ourselves an action plan of a COVID recovery. And it was very largely done during, we were writing our school development plan. So it kind of, it was quite fortuitous to us. But we were able to sort of encourage a sort of COVID recovery, you know, make sure that staff were well looked after, making sure that their fears were alleviated from having staff wellbeing groups, encouraging, you know, making sure that what the information that we were using that was coming from the local authority was absolutely precise and it was consistent. So people knew where they stood in terms of isolating and time off, and whether their children had COVID and their own childcare needs. And I think that was one of the real fabulous things about our school, is how the head and the leadership team rallied around, and how all the staff pulled together and cover was done. And, you know, in the olden days where no one would cover, you know, you couldn't cover outside of your own specialism, everyone just threw themselves into the pot, and, you know, and everyone was really grateful for all that work. But still there were all these children that just, you know, to get them back into education, get them settled. We got all their equipment again. We had all the pens and pencils, all the paper. We had clothing that was donated to us. We handed that out as well for people, so they had coats to come in with. And then it just went on to the business of getting, you know, their learning up and ready. But also what we had is a huge spike in mental health issues regarding young people, and anxiety and genuine fears over the death of we had a number of families who had lost people during the COVID, some through COVID symptoms themselves, and some just you know, at their own hands at a time when they were probably at the most lowest and most lonely. So we recognised that. We had quite extensive support from the exchange counselling programme that had come in, opening up 3 to 4 sessions a week for us. That's just by the sheer volume of referral. But also we worked with a platform for young people, and they were coming in doing resilience groups to help people with low mood, and recognise that low mood is not necessarily suicidal thought. And that there are strategies that they could build around that, and sort of more around resilience and sort of problem solving and what, you know, when you're at capacity. And the platform group have been brilliant with that. And we've had a number of those groups running quite concurrently in 6-week programs with 6 weeks different children, but also platform did some work with us on a one-to-one basis as well. We also took advantage of some of the local authority training for bereavement training that went out at that time, which was a huge support for our staff who are on the sort of more front line, having to deal with, you know, very upset and very anxious children. And then we just started looking at more things that we could do to help. We obviously, transition was an issue of the young pupils. We've noticed that with our current year 8s. You know, they had next to no transition. The information that was, well, you're normally information rich. I know ourselves and Pentra Harvard both have excellent transition work with our local primary schools. When you normally have you have a really rich dialogue, you understand the families, you know the kids before they come in. We didn't have that with the year 8s. It was difficult when they first came, and to settle them in. They had no transition during the summer holidays. They had never, you know, some of them had never stepped foot inside the school until the day they had to start. And we felt that was just really tough. And it had quite an effect on them in terms of behaviour and how long it would you know, Mr. Goulding will tell you, it takes year 7s at least a half a term to a term to settle into the routines of school in secondary schools. And you have lots of ups and downs with year 7s, and it does tend to sort of calm. But I did notice with the current year 8s that we had, it was difficult to engage them. It was difficult to, you know, because they'd been out of school for some time. but we, you know, and in stark contrast to the year 7s that we've got who came in this year, who did have transition, and we did go out to the cluster primary schools, and you know, to a point. I mean, some of the primary schools were running on different protocols, and obviously primary schools have smaller staff members, so to lose a staff member from COVID from an outside visitor could be, you know, devastating to the running of the school. But we had good transition work with them, good transition work coming into the schools during the summer term. A lot of our transition events were held outside and in Singleton Park and other such places, so there's plenty of fresh air and space, so everyone was happy, and minibuses were brought up. You know, there was no crossover of staff. And in stark contrast to where the year 8s were, you know, it was, you realise how important it was for the transition events to continue. But also through that, we have an inclusion centre in ours called TIDE, which is for training in inclusion, development and engagement. And we saw a real spike in that from some of the more vulnerable learners who are more socially vulnerable, affected by economics and the social environment that they're in. And they were coming in. The TIDE pupils were coming in. They were attending. They wanted to, you know, they came in. They got back on with the work. They got back on track. You know, it was more of a, and at times it was like a mental health clinic for them. But we continued that, and then we opened up because we'd had so many children. I don't know if that was really pandemic based, but we have so many children who apply for our school who have statements and hours of support. And we have so many now that what we have with the problem is that there aren't enough places in SDFs for children who you know, by rights should have an SDF placement. They end up with 27.5 hours in mainstream. So we've actually created some new nurture classes and also invested in our specialist teaching facility. So now the children in our SDFs probably have the best classrooms in the school. Whereas, you know, my own experience growing up, they always seem to be underneath stairs or in old cupboards and things like that. Well, in our school, it's in a purpose-built, brand new 2 classrooms for our nurture groups, attached to our SDF, who have their own toilets, their own entranceway into school now, and you know, as also for staff. So it's a fantastic environment, but it also helped with those children who were the most vulnerable and most affected by the pandemic itself. And then there's just generally good stuff that was going on in school in terms of data tracking, keeping an eye on attendance, making sure attendance codes were accurate, and that we could then track those who were on COVID and those who were just more reluctant to come to school and were taking advantage of, I suppose, in easing on attendance, but getting those back on track, but also looking at the data. I think having the centre assessment grades as well was a big change. We, you know, also without the exams, there's a lot of additional pressures that are put on staff in terms of assessments and marking and evidence and moderation, like we'd never seen before. That was tough on staff, and I think Mr. Goulding will probably agree with that. But we got through that. But the most important thing is that the children got the grades that they duly deserved, and they weren't disadvantaged at all. And that the evidence was there to justify the gradings that those young people had. So I hope that's covered quite a bit for you. I mean, if there's any questions that you've got to ask or anything that you want of us, then I'm more than happy to answer anything. But I appreciate that Mr. Goulding probably has other stuff he might want to speak about as well.
Sure, thanks very much, Mr. Payne. That's very helpful. Can we ask questions now, please, committee members, of Mr. Payne before we move on to Mr. Goulding at Pentra Harvard? Is that okay? Have we got any questions at this stage, please? I can't see any hands up there. I've got a number of different questions. Thanks very much for that, Ashley. And I know that many of the committee members would have had the opportunity to visit Dylan Thomas School previously. Overburdening the overburdened is something that keeps coming back to me all the time. We see an awful lot of work going on across Swansea schools. Excellent work, excellent commitment. Do you think that I can understand the hiatus of pressure from the pandemic, but are we overburdening the front line? Is it too much bureaucracy, would you say?
I mean, I think Mr. Davis would probably answer that better than me, but you know, it's a good head. You know, he just keeps quite a lot of that. He's quite dedicated to his work. He puts in long hours. He would have sifted through quite a lot of that. I think in terms of the overburdens, I think some of the information that came out of the WJC was unhelpful. Didn't really have any real clarity regarding the examinations, and that's been a bit of a theme. And I think that side of it has been probably the most disappointing, and that sort of lack of leadership from that. And also, I think what I was upsetting during it was leaked information from Welsh Government before it had gone to local authority about information about schools being found on Wales Online before it even, it was a professional courtesy that head teachers would surely have been the first people to have that information, rather than it, people phoning in and telling us about our own business. I think that was very disappointing throughout. But in terms of the local authority, I mean, with the local authority, you're restricted by their own policies, the procedures, the health and safety guidance and guidelines that they have to follow. And I mean, to coin a phrase with the kids, is that it is what it is. You can't change that. But in terms of coming out and supporting in terms of school, I mean, people's hands were tied. People were conducting their business from their own homes, and to a point they continue to do so. I don't think that anyone ever felt that was a void or a gap between us who were working around kids and the local authorities approach it, because they're two very different things. But certainly from our point of view, it was like, it was better to get our kids in. We wanted the children and young people in the schools, and we wanted them in as soon as we possibly could, because we knew that we provide a consistency, and for some people, for young people in our school, it's also 2 meals a day that we're providing as well, and it's important that those opportunities weren't lost. I can't say I was overly happy about it going to a payment system. I always felt that with the food packages and parcels, I knew that the food was going to those young people and not being used to pay off accrued debts or anything else, or on luxury items, and that we knew that the food was going straight to those who needed it the most. But no, I don't think on a personal level I haven't felt an overburden. But then, like I said, we were quite screened and protected by Mr. Davis, the head teacher, during that. So
thank you. The other area that I think of interest for me is, you spoke about the school having over 50% free school meals, and you mentioned the phrase social vulnerability in a number of different comments that he made there. This committee is very keen on a number of important areas. One of those areas is looking at vocational education and tweaking out educational potential where it exists. And I've had quite a lot of contact from people talking about the value of sport and sporting opportunities to keep young people on the right track. So in the context of social vulnerability and community links, could you say something about the links that the school benefits from with that kind of, because I know the school's had a lot of great work in the sporting context, and that's fantastic to see. Can you say a little bit about the value of that for the young people at the school?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously we're in the infancy of quite a lot of projects which are just coming to fruition now, but we're opening up we've got a new gym for aerobics and weights that are being opened up for the young people preschool. They've got to go through an induction and to make sure there's safe usages of it. We've also got community times marked off for community use and community use only for the Mooga and the 3G, so that it's not totally on a commercial basis. So, obviously there is a lot of money out there for 3G pitches after school, and they do charge quite a lot for the use of it. But I feel that our pricing is based on the council pricing, but also we've earmarked times where young people can use it. We've also recently appointed a rugby hub officer who's going out into the primary schools, supporting the primary schools in our transition, but also giving out rugby coaching, but also using that coaching to encourage the young people down to the school so that they can use the facilities down here. We also use the facilities during the day for the cluster primary schools so that they can use it too. There's also how you restructure inside the school. You know, before we used to just have a PE department. Well, those days are gone with sort of core purposes and the new curriculum, and that now our PE is incorporated into health, well-being, and nutrition. So you've got catering is involved with that, plus the health and well-being, plus supporting healthy life choices. So it's a much bigger, just a much bigger body of people now. But we also, we've employed coaches as well. So there's coaching systems going on as well. So it's not just PE, but there's also specific skills being taught. And we're trying to do that and balance it against the community usage after 5 o'clock. But yeah, heavily involved in that. And also there's a number of, there's national surveys that you can do for the Healthy Schools survey, also a PASS service survey, which is about children's attitudes towards learning. And from the results of those, you can get quite a sort of a rich diet of where you are as a school and what your next steps can be in terms of help and support. But yeah, having good facilities on school sites is hugely important. You know, if you're trying to encourage healthy lifestyles, and if you're a school that still had a tuck shop and selling chocolate, it's like, how can you promote a healthy lifestyle whilst continue those sort of archaic practices? I don't know, maybe that's a question, we could ask our catering services in terms of what they're offering on for lunches and things like that. But we wanted an upheaval and an overhaul of our sports facilities and the use of our fields. And yes, from part of that, rental is fed straight back into the school in terms of having we run a ALN disability football session with Swansea City, and they come in during the 3 to 5. So we have children from other schools, other children with disabilities coming in for football sessions, and trying to really open up that sort of community approach so that the facilities that we have here are being used by all members of our community.
Lovely, thank you very much. Councillor Mike Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Mr. Payne.
Hi, Mike.
You mentioned in your address that you have had to stick to council policies during the pandemic.
I was talking about health and safety legislation.
Right, because this is your chance, talking to the Policy Development Committee, which we are, to influence future policies. If you have any, you'd like to change any policies, or have you any new policies to suggest that we could put in place, or we could consider putting in place, that would help the flow and of the education in your school, basically?
But I'd have to be more sort of cognizant of all the policies that were there. I mean, I'm a big, the policies for running organisations and schools, you need to have good managerial policies, and they are important. But for me to answer that, I'd have to see all the sort of forthcoming policies, and of course I'd air support, and I'd always be quite frank, but not rude, obviously. But I'd be, in what it can be and can't be. And I think in relation to your question, I think I was relating mine more to the health and safety guidance that was coming in on a sort of day-to-day and weekly basis. It was changing so quickly and so fast, it was hard to keep up. And a policy shouldn't be doing that. A policy should have an evaluation and a review and a thorough, evaluation of its effectiveness. And I just felt that we were just, every day was something new regarding the sort of health and safety in the running of schools, and it was changing, and it was difficult for the head teachers to keep a consistency on it. You'd get into a school and it would be working in one school, and then suddenly, another school was doing something different. And trying to, it's also about when the year groups were coming in. It's not to do with policy, but there were inconsistencies in that. Schools were saying they were going to do one thing and end up, for one reason or another, not all their fault. The people weren't just being difficult. It was just that contextually things were very different in different areas, and there were different pressures on different people. And as school leaders, it wasn't just about pupils, it was about unions and about people's lives and people's genuine fears. And sometimes policies and people don't see those, unless you're actually there with someone crying their eyes out about being so fearful of returning to school and the fear that they might kill their children, and that's perpetuated by the media at the time as well. But to answer your question, I'd have to see policies that are being introduced, and I'm more than happy to read through them and give feedback on them.
You can be as candid as you like in front of our committee, because we need input to produce these policies.
You're not ready for my candid opinions.
So I quite understand where you're coming from now when you were relating to the health and safety. But as I say, it is our job on this committee to produce new policies and good policies. So this is why I was asking you your opinion, if there was anything that was irksome to your everyday job then, basically. So thank you very much for your answer, and thank you, Chair, for letting me answer the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I think it's a very interesting area of the frontline activities. You know, we see things from our perspective, but as Mr. Payne says, there's been a huge disruption, a huge amount of pressure on the front line, and we keep asking for more. So I think the interesting thing is for this committee is if we can take pressure off the front line. I know there's lots of statutory obligations, of course there is, but if we can do whatever we can do to avoid unnecessary bureaucracy, then that could possibly ease some pressure so we can focus more on education effectiveness. And I think that's the area. It's an interesting area, albeit a very challenging one, I know. I'm conscious there are no other hands up at the moment. So on that note, can I thank you very much, Mr. Payne, for your time and your insights from Dillon Thomas School. We will be in touch. I certainly will be in touch. Now I'm on the governing body, you'll see even more of me. Sorry about that. But can I then pass the baton on to Mr. Matthew Goulding at Pentra Harvard School. Matthew, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Can I share my screen? You happy for me to do that?
Yeah, I am. Gareth.
As long as it's bilingual.
Yes, it is. I've gone through all the slides. There shouldn't be any rogue slides in there. I'll share my slides. Right. So I suppose following on from what Ashley said, there's lots of overlap. I'll try not to duplicate too many things, and I suppose this seems like a lifetime away from the conversation I had in the summer when we were kindly invited to come to the meeting. And I think for us as a school, really, throughout the pandemic and coming out the other side, I'm not sure where the other side is at the minute, having been through it, has been doing a lot of work around sort of understanding that notion of vulnerability and the impact that it has on life chances. And certainly if we are to explore the concept of keeping pupils on track, it's been really important for us to sort of step back and revisit some of the things that we were working on prior to the pandemic, because it has been very unusual. From a leadership, from a teaching perspective, and then really getting our staff to press reset at times around what we mean by vulnerability, because it's a very complex notion. So just to give some context, really, for those people in the meeting who are not sure about where we are in the profile of our secondary school. We are 11 to 16. We've got 1,071 students on roll. We've grown significantly in size, but what we have noticed throughout the course of this pandemic, the percentages of students who are on free school meals, those who have received the transitional protection, and similar to what Ashley was saying, that has increased, and what comes with that are the added challenges. When you look at our sort of WIMD data there, where 63% of our students live in 30% of the most deprived areas. That's an increase of almost 10%, I believe, if my maths is correct, over the last few years, and that has really brought some other challenges with it. So if I go on to the sort of developing a shared understanding within our own school of what we mean by vulnerability. And as you can see, I've sort of listed there, there's sort of 8 common components, I suppose, of vulnerability. And they're all barriers. They all present as barriers to academic progress, you know, whether a child's got ALN, whether they're looked after, their free school meals, minority ethnic, English additional language, behaviour, attendance, youth offending, mental health, you know, and we've seen a growing number of students presenting with these. And I was at a meeting today with our cluster heads, and there's a growing number of children within our cluster schools. But equally, we have to be mindful that not all students in some of these groups are vulnerable, and many of the students within these groups are also disadvantaged because of detrimental circumstances beyond their control. And what we have found throughout the course of the pandemic is how we can manage these concerns, these issues, and similar to what Ashley was talking about in terms of providing the emergency childcare, the digital technology, the food barriers, the well-beings, the check-ins. You know, there's a huge amount of work that went on that maybe colleagues are not familiar with, and they may not have always been the teachers either. I think our associate staff in school played a massive role in keeping the sort of the wheels turning in some very, very challenging circumstances. But you know, I come back to the concept of keeping pupils on track or getting back on track. For me, there are key milestones in a child's education journey, where we've got reception from year 1, year 3, year 6, year 7, year 9, year 11, and the post-16, and how we work together as a cluster and as a group of secondary schools is really important. And from conversations with colleagues in our cluster schools, we know that some of the real barriers to academic progress, to success within the children, are the lack of reading skills. And we know from the research that's presented is that the lack of reading skills, a child's literacy levels, are one of the main contributors, I suppose, to a life of hardship. And a real challenge for us within our cluster of ending that intergenerational sort of cycle of poverty. And, you know, it is apparent. But I think for us as a secondary school, you know, I'll use the notion of trying to sort of put a plaster on some things within education, within the schools. And I think that's not just the pandemic. I firmly believe that that's been something that we've done for a long time, almost sort of firefighting at Key Stage 4 predominantly, because we've been driven by external accountability. But, you know, I do believe that qualifications are extremely important for all of our students because they're the gateways. They open the doors to the next part. But I think we've got to be more deliberate in our plans going forward, and appreciate that we're not only dealing with the traditional barriers to success that have been with us before, but also the ills that are left to us by the pandemic. And I genuinely believe that we're not going to see the effects of the pandemic for a number of years, from the children who are coming into our cluster primary schools in the sort of reception years, who are non-verbal, social skills are very, very low, and that's first-hand conversations from today's meeting, that's real. And I think what we as a cluster of schools and within Swansea have to and I suppose across Wales, for many young people, their futures are largely determined from an early age. However, we have to determine what our children need, what they require, and the excitement, I suppose, of what Curriculum for Wales allows us to do is look at not just a curriculum for Wales, not just a curriculum for Pentraford School, but a curriculum for the Pentraford cluster. And for too long, we've been obsessed, I suppose, as a profession of covering content, but actually really unpicking now, what do the children in our schools, in our cluster need, and being brave and saying, well, instead of teaching 100% of the content, and the students only learning, I suppose, 60% of it, being brave and saying, well, let's teach 80% and learning 70% of what they have. And I think we have an opportunity to do that from both a formal and an informal curriculum. And I think the system has been clogged up, and we talk about keeping pupils back on track and getting pupils back on track. And I think we've got to sort of strip things back and say, well, what do our children need to know now? Where are our children at this moment in time? And being brave. And I think having the support then from our sort of challenge, our school improvement advisors, and from our governing bodies, I think that's something that's really, really important for us as a school. And I think to get our children back on track, to tie into really what Ashley was talking about earlier on, it's about knowing our students, knowing where our students are now, and really building up that sort of profile, their academic profile, their well-being profile. Are there any children? And I think the adverse child experiences. Are there any children with social services? Using our pupil attitude to self data, the PASS survey. Where's their reading age? What's their phonics level? And really drilling down and knowing our children is going to be really, really important for us to develop that curriculum, that formal curriculum and that informal curriculum. And we have to do something differently. I firmly believe that, and sort of be proactive as opposed to reactive. And in school, we've looked to develop a sort of three-pronged attack to support teachers, and that's the development of what we've called a pupil on a page, a class on a page, and a year on a page that allows us then to sort of profile our sort of children. And it's important, so we do avoid having any preconceived ideas of the children and trying to be as objective as we can. And what we discover are those patterns of lower reading skills from the most deprived children. But then, okay, well, what are we going to do differently? So if we are going to get our children back on track, then we have to think and view things through a very different lens, and trying to address some of our own unconscious biases with this information, because sometimes those preconceived ideas and poor decisions that we make can often hinder the progress when the data is not available. So just to give you an example, I appreciate this isn't this is an example of a pupil on a page where we can really drill down onto where they are, where are the children in terms of their attitude to learning, where are they with their home learning, their feelings to themselves, their cognitive profile, their reading age, and then identifying, okay, well, what do we need to put in place to support this child to overcome some of those barriers. And then we move into our class on a page. So when we look at the attendance of the class, the feelings towards school, the reading age, so we can tailor our curriculum and the work that we do. It can be much more sort of bespoke to those children and the classes that we have. And similarly then, having that year group on a page that really sort of tells a story that allows us to really be forensic and unpick the work. You know, we've no doubt, like Dylan Thomas and the cluster schools of today, we've really taken a hammer in with attendance of children not coming in. And I think, you know, our education welfare officer can only do so much. We've had to look to employ additional attendance workers. And I think maybe some support from a local authority and maybe repurposing some resources around that area to supporting those schools that are facing greater challenges. Which I think in that way there, we know that attendance and those barriers to learning often present in areas of high deprivation. And I think that would be a real benefit, certainly for us. You know, as I say, we have a finite amount of resources. Where we've increased the resources, I think there may well be a need for reinvestment there, because the need is there. We're seeing it with families, and we have some families who've not returned at all. And as Ashley said, around that anxiety and various other things. But I think we have to be careful not to think in terms of a deficit model either. You know, we have to have those high expectations and an appreciation that equity within our schools for our most disadvantaged, to get them back on track, is about fostering high levels of achievement. That even through the pandemic, it's about, oh wait, can I just, my lights have gone off with the sensor. I feel as if I've been engulfed in darkness. There we are. That's a perk of the new build and the energy saving systems that we've got with the lights.
Brilliant. We can see you.
You can see me now. Yes, I think it's about giving children opportunities, about being successful, maintaining their high expectations, that high quality diet in the classrooms, not lowering the bar. And as a school and as a group of schools within our cluster, and I know we're doing some work around leadership development with Dylan Thomas. I think that is there, but I think sometimes it's teacher expectations of what our children can achieve, and not think in terms of, okay, well, this is what you've missed. We can't undo that. We have to look forward and think, okay, well, what can we now control? And we have to be mindful of sometimes decisions that we make in schools can have long-lasting sort of ramifications for the children, and decisions that are made early on in a child's educational career by a teacher, by a school leader, can really sort of negatively impact on our children. So for us, it's been about that desire to achieve excellence. It's been that fostering of the core skills and experiences, knowledge, whatever we want to call it, that they haven't had. And for us, it's that excellence in reading, writing, oracy, rich cultural experiences, because they've missed it. And our children, and similar to in Dylan Thomas, children in areas of socioeconomic deprivation there are less likely to have that at home. And I think we've got to make sure that the formal and the informal curriculum and the opportunity we provide are the best that they can possibly be. And that's something that we've really worked on in school. And I know, Councillor Dirk, from the conversation that we had, we were talking about the opportunities for potentially community champions and mentors for the young people. I think that is really important. And when we look at those sorts of activities, it's about considering the purpose, the role of those champions and the mentors, and being clear what we define success to be Is it the reduction in NEETs? Is it that they go on to a college course, employment? And it's about identifying those opportunities for partnership working and innovation to improve the life chances, you know, I believe of our children. And I say our children, and I can honestly say they're our children as a former pupil of Pentrahavod School, and the community that we serve is building those opportunities for our local young people, that supporting social mobility, you know, and it is about thinking differently for our children. And some of the things that we've done around that I'm very keen to foster and grow our alumni program that we started in Easter of this year. You know, as a child growing up in Mansleton, you know, I was very unaware of what careers existed beyond a builder, a plumber, and a pharmacy technician. And there's no disrespect to those careers, but that's all I saw. And I think what we have to do in school is take our children to places that they've never been, physically and philosophically, I suppose. And our alumni program, you know, you don't know something exists if you can't see it. And building and engaging a network of volunteers who've come back and met with our children through our achievement evening, and welcoming former students back into our school. And quite a few of them supported us through lockdown with a donation of digital equipment and books and things like that. And that was really, really inspiring for us. And it's about saying, well, okay, this is what's happened. This is what our alumni program can do, and they can support them with apprenticeships. I happened to bump into some former students who I taught whilst watching a live band, and they've gone on to be very successful electricians, their own businesses, and they are super keen to come back in and work with it. And I think it's about reaching out to our community, come back in, just help refocus, because our children may be a bit more vulnerable than others, not all, but in some cases, and it's about linking up with that. We've worked with Careers Wales and the Education Business Exchange, who we have a long-standing partnership with, where they've been into school and they have continued with their work, where shared delivery of the curriculum, teaching within the curriculum. Last week we had the first of our careers fairs face-to-face, and that was for year 8. And we had children in year 10 asking, well, we never had that. Well, they've missed out. So we can look forward to one of those in the spring for our year 10s. We've got a cluster careers fair organised for next summer term, where our cluster schools will come together to show our children, okay, well, this is what's happened. Let's get back on track. Let's get our focus back on the future. We can only control, you know, I always say, our destiny is in our own hands. And Careers Wales then have been supplying ambition, employment videos, and our year 10 and 11 children have one of those every week, and former students of ours have come in. And I think it's about opening doors, opening the virtual window for our children to see what is beyond the barriers of Pentrahavod School. Another one of our projects that we've utilised to get back our students back on track is our Virgin Atlantic partnership. We're one of only 3 schools in the world. It's us, Crawley, and a school in I think it's Atlanta, Georgia, where we have a 3-year partnership, and that's they're in today, where we've got 135 students in each year group over the 3 years will benefit from this mentoring program. And we have deliberately targeted some of our more disadvantaged children, because it is about building cultural capital and giving them opportunities that they may not have had, and really fostering that sense of community, that realization of ambition for our children. again, another activity that we've been, sorry, apologies, you missed that slide there, something called the Brilliant Club. You know, we have to be mindful that some of our most disadvantaged may not be our lowest attainers or least able students, and we have to be careful not to label all disadvantaged students as not being able to access course X or Y when they leave school. And sometimes it's easy to do that when they may display some negative behaviours, but we have to unpick that, and from our pupil profiles, drilling down as to why. And we do have a duty to broaden horizons and open doors for the children. And the Brilliant Club is a programme for our more able and talented students, those children with some high cognitive scores, but without the data, we wouldn't know that. And again, looking at whole school health and well-being, again, engaging with the community partners. Some more sort of innovative work that we're doing this year is trying to establish a profile, predict, prevent model. So we are more proactive, refining our SRE work around, we know that some of the children haven't had the opportunity to experience some of our programs that we've had, and similar to what Ashley was talking about there, we've made great use of platform exchange, spectrum and choices, and I think it's been really, really powerful for our school community and for those children to have those increased opportunities, because what they've done, they've created capacity within the school, and I think without those third sector groups coming in to support our children, we wouldn't be able to offer half of some of those activities, and I think it's been really, really important. But again, you know, we talk about health and well-being. The children will be undertaking their School Health Research Network survey, which will allow us to build a profile and a curriculum for the spring term and responding to the needs of our children. But it has been it has been tough, you know, like Ashley alluded to earlier. It's about trying to re-establish those norms of school life, and for some children may not have had routines during the pandemic. And what we noticed, similar to what Dylan Thomas had, is that the year 7s who have come through our cluster transition program in the summer may have settled a bit better than maybe previous cohorts. And as I say, I'm just conscious of where I'm at in terms of time, so I don't want to go over that. And I think there's some examples around some of the things that we've done, I suppose, by establishing the Pentra Harvard reading program, giving children an opportunity to reconnect through an investment in literature and reading, and making that really the forefront of our work, because that for us is the big challenge. Where our children have come in, we have 60% of the children, I'd say, below functional literacy levels, and through student voice it was clear that the children are not engaging in reading for pleasure. So what we've tried to do is broaden and work with our cluster to increase opportunities to reconnect through reading, through books, through literature, to foster that empathy, and that's something that we are incredibly passionate about. And if somebody asks me what do we need to do going forward, I suppose, you know, we know that literacy, we talk about keeping children back on track, we talk about all these other activities, but I think if we build that profile from a young age, to develop that ambitious, confident young people, you know, they've got to be literate, they've got to be numerate, they've got to have that positive attitude to self. And I think creating opportunities through health and well-being activities, sport is a big part of my personal life, but also I've seen the benefits of sport, and like Ashley, working with other groups to deliver health and well-being. That plaster, if we can avoid that plaster, if we get our children literate, numerate, positively engaged in physical activity and physical literacy. And I don't mean every child playing football and rugby. It's about looking beyond those activities and offering them something different. But I think if we are really serious about breaking the intergenerational issues around poverty, the last 15 years within Wales, attainment in reading has been limited, progress in reading has been limited. And I think we can see from an early age, some of our children who've ended up in our alternative provision, the barriers, if we could profile some of those younger and work with our cluster colleagues, then I think we will develop a very successful generation, and we won't be talking about the impact of the pandemic. And I think it starts by giving them opportunities to be successful. And I think I'll stop there. Councillor Dirk.
But Matthew, can I hand on heart first off tell you off for calling me Councillor Dirk, right? Or if we're going to do it now, we've got to do it every time you see me. Okay, that's a new rule, right? I'm not going to say what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm going to pause and I'm going to invite colleagues to ask their questions. Can you stop sharing the screen for us, Matthew, please? Can I go to Councillor Mike Lewis first, please?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Matthew, for your presentation. Very interesting. You mentioned in your presentation that bad attendance was, and you were engaging these pupils to try and get more of an attendance from them. 3 or 4 years ago, Councillor Des Thomas and myself, we visited the school.
Yeah.
And we were highly impressed at the time with the successful program you were running to engage the bad attendees by offering a more vocational approach. For example, there was hairdressing, vehicle repairs, and such things. Are you still running with this program? Because this is something that's close to my heart, and I know the PDC, this PDC has been pressing for vocational education for students who are perhaps not as academically minded as some of the other pupils. And I'd just like to have your thoughts, and if you can let us know if you are still running with this program. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I suppose there's two things there. In terms of vehicle repairs, during my time at Pendragon School, I've not been aware of the school running a vehicle repair and hairdressing in recent years, where there was something that was happening prior to that, Councillor. We do work with Gower College. We've got a number of children going to Gower College and accessing those provisions, and I do think it's a big part of what school is about, offering that broad and balanced curriculum. Sometimes our children, we offer and they go to the college, and sometimes they don't like sometimes going to the college, and I'll be quite candid and I'll say that. And I think sometimes I know myself and Paul at Dylan Thomas have had this conversation about children like a school environment as well, that safety net of having courses delivered within the school and by school staff. And I think what would be really beneficial is if that, because our staff, the expertise for horticulture isn't in our school at the minute, but I know that's something that Dylan Thomas offer. I think it's a big part, but I think it's also not for us not to say that because they're taking part in those activities, it's reducing the stigma sometimes attached to some of these courses. because sometimes some children are shoehorned into courses, not because they're of benefit to those children. So we've diversified our vocational provision, and we've run a public services vocational course, and we know that there's a progression from our school in terms of a level 2 course. You can go and do a level 3 course in public services at Gower College, and then you can actually go on to do anything you want to. For example, my older brother left Gower College and done a level 3 course and went to study criminology and is now in the police, you know, as an example of those courses. But I think some of the barriers there are around maybe funding and facilities for us to be able to run some of those courses, because there is a finite pot of money, and our children like the familiarity, as I say, with our staff. In terms of attendance, you know, we had worked incredibly hard from 2012 to get up to 93.7% attendance, and this was the conversation I had in the cluster today. We are seeing attendance levels at 86, 87%, and that's not because we are not engaging. We've invested in our attendance teams, but I think there is a layer, and I'm not pleased that I'm using fixed penalty notices as the only factor why parents send their children to school, but there is a deterrent within some of those strategies that the service offered, and I know that that's not necessarily the case and not necessarily what's happening, but we have to be mindful that both Pendrahaven and Dillon Thomas and our clusters serve a very, very deprived and challenging, not pleased, I think the whole cluster is like that, but the level of need, you know, I believe there should be an education welfare officer per secondary school when we're talking of a school population of 1,071, and given the level of need that's coming through, I think that would be a huge advantage. And I know there's remodeling work that's already gone on within the service. My lights have gone out, as you see. The electricity saving is happening again. You know, the support that we get from Emma, our education welfare service, and the like is there, but the pressure is evident. The conversations that I'm having with our cluster schools, they're real, and please don't think it's through a want of trying.
Lovely, thank you. Have you frozen?
No, I've just paused.
There we are. That's okay. Thank you, Matthew. My system went a little bit wonky then. Can I go on to Councillor Des Thomas next, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your presentations. Very interesting. Hopefully, we're not going to suffer with this COVID situation, you know, forevermore. We appreciate you've got challenging catchment areas, and your reputation goes before you to a certain extent, because, you know, we're aware that you run excellent courses for low achievers, if I can put it that way, and we're really concerned with what we can do to reduce the number of NEETs in the system, or outside the system rather, aren't they? And whilst you are successful, we feel that not all schools are successful. So we want to know what you are doing right, so that we can pass it on and make sure that other schools can follow some of your examples, for instance.
I think what you say there around, you know, that if we look at the, you mentioned that about the low, I think it was low achieving students. When you look at some of the low achieving students and some of those reasons as to why they're lower achieving, it stems back down to low levels of literacy, low levels of numeracy. And I think I come back to my slide when I talked about putting a plaster on and on at secondary school. And I think we can actually profile some children, because there is a link between some of the children who end up as NEET and some of the children who end up and some of their underlying barriers to success there. And I think it is about us being honest and having that shared Swansea-wide conversation. Okay, well, where are we in terms of literacy levels? Literacy levels are the barriers to employment. They're the barriers to future success. And as a country, we haven't really moved an awful long way. And I feel that we're putting a barrier on there. But in terms of our work around NEETs, the large part of that is the partner working, that engaging with the through Careers Wales, our careers worker, Nicola Edwards, right, is absolutely outstanding. She's proactive, she is committed, but equally as committed as the teachers in school. We run our own internal NEET panels from year 9. Because through over the years that we've worked in the school, we've seen that you can identify potentially, like Mike used to supply the VAP data. We build those profiles and those systems for ourselves. The pupil on the page, the year on the page, the class on the page, looking at attendance from the get-go. But I think we have that information early on. That information of poor attendance, the characteristics then of children who are likely to become NEET, of a profile. And we have to be honest and say, well, let's look at our cluster schools. Where are we? Which children are there? And what are we going to do differently in order to avoid it going forward? Sorry, you're
on mute, Des.
Sorry, Chair. Do you get the information early enough? Does it need to come through from primary schools more efficiently, or does it?
I think it's having, for example, within our, we've been trying to, we use the 6-year attendance data, because if the child's attendance has been in a primary school from year 3, 50%, 60%, 60%, 70%, then the profile, and we're looking now at siblings of children who've been 60%, 70%, 80%. We have to be honest and say, well, okay, well, what are we doing? Are we investing enough resource, and what are those underlying? And that's why I was talking about the work of the Education Welfare Service. She can only do so much. And I think it's not putting the plaster on at 14, 15, 16. It's about saying, okay, well, how do we do differently? And maybe sharing some of the work, maybe with our cluster schools, having them come and share some of those strategies that they do. Because, and listening to some of the challenges that they face in, that I talk to them firsthand. But I certainly see it on a, we can profile these children from earlier than 16 and 15. And we have to be smart and be honest and not be frightened about saying, you know what, this is where our schools are at. And I think for too long, as a system, we've said, oh, well, I have to say this because I'm being judged and somebody's going to tell me I'm good or I'm excellent. Well, let's be brave and say, well, this is the profile of our year group. What are we doing? And what this group needs will be very different than next year's year group, and being responsive to that data. But you can't do that unless you've got the data on your children. And that's why we've built the profile and that forensic detail of knowing our children.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Des. Thank you, Matthew. Can I go to Councillor Fiona Goulding next, please?
Yeah, thank you. It's picking up on what you said about NEETs, and I just wondered, thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry, I probably didn't hear all of it because of work commitments. I wondered whether you used the Cynnydd project to engage NEETs, and if so, what you're going to do, conscious that that's an ESF funded project, what were you going to do, ongoing, being aware that that project is going to end, but obviously you're doing a lot else to support NEETs just from the school perspective. So I just wondered whether you were accessing support.
Yes, we've worked very, very closely with our Cynnydd worker. I'm mindful, as with all schools who are accessing this facility, that the funds are potentially, well, not going to be renewed. I'm hoping that somebody somewhere will find a pot of money that will allow us to run a similar project, because the conversation that I had with Dave Bowden last summer was around that, because there is a realistic need to fund on top of for those children. We have to be realistic that they need extra funding, and what we've looked to do is grow our alternative provision, our PACE provision, and increase in staff, and look to offer some of those experiences in-house through third partners. But it is going to be a challenge. I will not sit here and think and say it isn't. And I think we have to be mindful that some of the provisions that we're trying to access are also very expensive. And what do they get out of those provisions? Do we want an experience? Do we want a qualification? I tell you what, sorry, I apologize, don't something else. Something that's really, really important at this work is children being on a work placement and working with employers. And really, but some of the bureaucracy that goes with that is painful, and I'm sure Ashley will agree there. And sometimes is it worth the rigmarole that goes with it, where we can try and do something else, and that's the barriers. And employers
on that, Matthew, just to help and support you in it, with the Cynnydd in particular. It was quite laborious. Lots of filling out. We were duplicating data which we had already generated, and we were duplicating it for no real reason or purpose. And in its infancy, when we had the Cynnydd, it seemed okay. We're really addressing this whole NEET agenda. But since that first year, and the funding slowly dissipated to just having a Cynnydd worker, but no financial provision to put any support or outreach work or proactive plans or anything like that, it just became a paper trail. It literally it almost ceased to have any purpose.
And I agree with that, Ashley, in terms of, but I also equally, both Ashley and myself appreciate that there's also requirements from external funding to get all these forms in. But the funding that it brought enabled us to access provision above and beyond what I'd class as that universal provision that we offer in school. So when we're looking at that tiered approach within the new ALN reform there, our children have the universal provision. They'll go to PACE for some specialist bespoke provision, but some of these children need something else. And the funding is a big issue. So that's where we're at.
Thank you. That's fair enough. Thanks.
That's excellent. Can I thank you both? There's no other questions, no other hands up. Can I thank you both for what I found very insightful and powerful. For me, just a comment to close things from my perspective before we move on to the rest of the agenda. I think that having this relentless focus on vulnerability, defining vulnerability is critically important. Having key performance indicators so we know what we're looking at and we know what success looks like is critical. And I think that what keeps coming through to me is that we've got a plethora of data, but we've got to use it more positively and perhaps more smartly for Swansea. So it's understanding Swansea in that sort of context, I think is important. I accept absolutely the power and importance of reading, writing and oracy, especially for those children who are less likely to have that support at home. So powerful insights there. The words you've used, Matthew, I've written down here, the importance of profile, predict and prevent. And I think that encapsulates the spirit of this PDC in this municipal year. It's about profiling, so understanding what we're looking at, using the data to see whether we should be surprised or whether we should be predicting. And you've alluded to that a few times, Matthew. We know the problem's coming before it arrives. That leads me to think there are many links here, and we've discussed previously with other policy development committees. So I think after this meeting, we can share some information with the chairs of those other committees to look at horizontal links here. And I think that might be a powerful thing to do to take us forward. And the last thing for me is this idea of thinking differently, being brave, not being worried, but being brave about looking at the facts and the reality of the situations we find our way in and trying to plan together a way out, because they are our children. I mean, we are talking about a whole Swansea approach, and we've got best practice that needs to be cascaded. Last thing, sorry, this is the last thing from my point of view. We come back to a phrase I've used in Child and Family Social Services, the idea that we have a bonfire of bureaucracy. With the Cynnydd project, we've got 2 senior educators there telling us that, well, was the bureaucracy worth the hassle to get the benefit? And if we've got the power as a policy development committee to take that bureaucracy off the front line, then I suggest in any way we can possibly do that, we should do that, because you are the expert educators and that's what you should be spending most of your time doing. Sorry, Matthew, did you want to add something?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Councillor Dirk, Mike, whenever I should call you now, but I think it's about trusting senior leaders and school leaders and saying, right, well, this is the money. What are you going to do? Because there has to be that level of trust for me in saying, well, there's the funding. This is what you're going to do with it. Because sometimes it is frustrating. I will be honest, and I know Ashley echoes some of those thoughts. But I certainly thank you for inviting us to the meeting. Both I, Ashley, Paul. We've had conversations, and we work closely as 2 schools to try and support and share ideas and strategies of what's working, and being brave and saying, do you know what, if something's not working, that's okay as well, for us to scrap it and not drive needlessly into the dark with 2 lights off. And if it's not working, be brave and cut it and say, let's do something differently. And I think I have felt that that's something that we've got to do as a system, and what's right for our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both very much. I think there are 3 key strands, I think, that, and with these will reflect in the work plan as we go forward. And it seems to me it's about education and supporting people so they can achieve educationally, but very importantly and equally importantly, they can achieve in the vocational context, and we can value the power and importance of physical literacy, sport and health to keep people on track with that very robust sort of, have those roots running deep in communities as the new curriculum kicks in more and more. Thank you very much both. So moving forward on the agenda, we come to agenda item number 5, which is our work programme. And I've got to say that we're talking about a bonfire of bureaucracy and other things, and Helen Morgan-Rees has been suspiciously quiet up to now. So I hope Helen comes in at this point, because we might be getting too enthusiastic in some areas. But great insight there. You can't shoot us for being enthusiastic about such important issues, I think. So we've looked at the work programme up to now, and we've done a lot of work in understanding vulnerability, a lot of collection of data across a wide range of areas, and that's so important. So this focus now, I think, for me, and these are suggested work items that we've come to picking out areas of discussion for us and sharing with the Cabinet member and with Helen, that we look to the 15th of December towards vocational education. So getting a paper from council officers to look at where we are with vocational education, looking at issues to do with on-school, off-school, college facilities, bearing in mind what our educators are telling us, and looking at examples of best practice. I was in Coleg Cymoedd last week in Nantgarw, and they had some great outside facilities attached to the school, big canopy, and it was planting seeds, you know, about vocational skills, which was really interesting, with outside partners coming in. They were mending bikes and all that sort of. So let's have a little look at that, perhaps. January then, sport, health, physical literacy. February, and Matthew mentioned this, has been mentioned more than once, I know, adverse childhood experience and learning from colleagues in partneriaeth. So we can really understand those key issues there, which are very, very powerful. I don't know where we're going to end, because it depends on the election, of course, so that we might cut off sooner. But the other thing there is for us to make sure we've got a tying up session. And I'd suggest, if committee members are in agreement with this approach, that we go back, revisit where we started with Professor Chris Chapman, what we've learnt, and come back to tie the whole thing up as a neat parcel in a report to make clear recommendations at the end of the process. Can I ask committee members for their thoughts on that? But can I ask first Cabinet Member Robert Smith, Councillor Robert Smith, to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And you know, I'd endorse what you've said and what other members of the committee have said, because I think we've had very important and informative presentations by the two schools this afternoon that have brought up both the opportunities and some of the challenges that we're going to have to face. And I think, yes, certainly for the next meeting, looking at vocational education, it's easy to say the words, but I think, you know, some of the issues that have been brought up today, you know, in terms of how it's been viewed in the past, questions around parity of esteem, and how it's best to deliver those opportunities in terms of what we do on site and what we do in collaboration with other providers. And indeed, you know, if there's a kind of hybrid model, all of those issues need to be gone into. Because I think that this is going to be a crucial agenda moving forward. And as you've said on more than one occasion, and we've got a new curriculum in Wales. We've got qualification structure that is being revised, and that's an ongoing process. And we've got opportunities here to develop and to formulate an agenda both in Swansea, but could also influence further afield as well, and act as a model of good practice. So I certainly endorse what you said, Chair.
Thank you very much, Robert. Can I go next to Councillor Fiona Goulding, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think there was one item on the agenda, I haven't got it in front of me, that seemed that it would be worth including outdoor education in. And I know that's a big focus since COVID. So could we add outdoor education to that, you know, inquiry? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we could slot that in with the focus on sport, health, and physical literacy, Fiona, with an emphasis on that. Is that okay?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Who we got next? We got Councillor Lyndon Jones, please.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, I haven't come in early. I've been coughing and spluttering here, and I can't get about 5 words out. But I was so impressed with the two, representatives of the schools, and following on from a lot of that, we picked up on some of the things that we've been doing in the past, and certainly we've done a visit to both schools with the scrutiny body, and certainly around NEETs in Pendrahafod, and also looking at things that we're doing in Dylan Thomas School, and they were a real insight into what a good practice. And I totally support your programme going forward, because I think Councillor Mike Lewis said about vocational education, and as we all have, and I think it is absolutely important for those people who aren't academic, but they really have a future, as we've all said. and we need to look after those. Otherwise, those will be the people who will be unemployed, and we'll be letting them down, isn't it? Really. So, thanks.
Thank you, Lyndon. Helen, did you want to add anything?
No, given that we've overrun, Chair, I think it's fine that I don't comment at all. Thank you.
Right, there we are. Lovely. And Des Thomas. Des, you're on mute.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes, that's it.
Right, sorry. Yeah, both heads mentioned the, I think it was the CUNIF, is it the system, which is red tape heavy. Is it possible that we could have a brief report on that system? I'm not sure whether how much it's worth doing to it if it's coming to an end, but is there any possibility that we could look at that with a view to improving matters?
Yeah, good. Helen?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's an existing evaluation of Cynnydd, because it's not something we'd want to start, given that the project is coming to an end and it's beyond our control in terms of European funding. But I know there's a team, not within the education department, but elsewhere in the council, that may already have a piece of evaluation in hand, and we can share that with the committee, definitely.
Okay,
but starting a new piece of work now would probably be not as productive and give us the yield we want.
Okay, accept that,
Yes.
Chair. Thank you. As long as it's been looked at.
Thank you, Helen. And back to Councillor Robert Smith, please.
Yeah, I'd endorse that. I think that there've been a number of different pieces of work evaluating the Cynnydd project and so on.
Okay.
But you've launched me on one of my hobby horses, Des, as you know. The problem with these projects is, they achieve a great deal. And I'm not saying that, but it was the bureaucracy and the data gathering that was associated with them was one of the major problems. And was the data gathering commensurate with the amount of funding that was coming in? And I think that was something that I was never convinced about, and we need to get to the bottom of it in terms of designing future projects and designing future funding streams.
Okay, we'll leave it in your capable hands, Chair.
Thank you very much. It's I always find these meetings really quite exhilarating. And fair play to the schools for adding such value there, and thank you all for your great insight and questions. So if there's nothing else, is there anything else to add, anyone? Are we content? Okay, our next meeting is on Wednesday the 15th of December at 4 o'clock. And if there is nothing else, can I thank you all again and close the meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Get well,
Bye.
Lyndon. Get well.
Yes, I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, get better, Lyndon.
Yeah.
I think he's keeled over.